Reinvigorating, we'll be re-talking about how using gravity to skate is really like the whole trick, of course, to downhill. It makes it feel like you're skating downhill. Then we're going to bring something back that we haven't talked about in a while, which is the inner springs. So the inner springs to skate downhill. Then, if you find that you're invited to the dance, you better learn the dance steps, right? That's just the way it is. So we're going to make sure you know those. And then we're going to talk about how to stack wins. Because once you get one win, you want to stack them so you become an unstoppable force or an unstoppable coach. And we'll talk about that both from a coaching perspective and from a mechanics perspective. And then we're going to talk about how to get 37 times better in 1 year. The hint is that it comes down to 1% per day improvement. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's been missing this whole time for players is really this, a language. It really comes down to us having a language to describe the very best players. And this is kind of like my very simple breakdown of magic versus mechanics. So you've heard me say this many times before, which is it's not magic, it's mechanics. And what we find, especially with the best NHLers, like let's take a Connor McDavid, is when we look at him and we don't have a language to describe what's happening, it just looks like magic. You're just like, hey, I can't describe it. It's undescribable. It must be not learnable. It just kind of looks like magic. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like sometimes you just want to be wowed, right? Something like if you're a fan, you probably want to go and just be like, wow, like how did McDavid do that? How did, Bedard do that? How did Crosby do it? Like you kind of want that if you're a fan. You don't actually want to know all the mechanics, I don't think, if you're a fan. But if you're wanting to get better, or if you're wanting to help your players get better, then you probably want to know the mechanics. Because what you can do with mechanics that you can't do with magic is you can actually do repetition. You can actually do skill development. You can actually be intentional about getting better. So when you have a language to describe what's going on with these NHLers, then that gets broken down into mechanics. Then you can do repetition on those things. Then you can do the 10,000 hours. So what is the language that we have at Train 2.0 downhill skating system? Well, we've got a set of fundamentals. These are fundamental mechanics. These are like the dance steps. We'll talk about them. We have one called the corkscrew. We have one called the 10 and 2. Some people call it the mohawk. We have one called the anchor. We have another called the soft drag. We have another one called the outside edge rollover, the punch step, punch turn, the stutter step, the shuffle, and cross unders. So we have these broken down into these different mechanics that are descriptive of what top NHLers do. When you look at this, there's probably a bunch of like words or terms that maybe you're not familiar with, right? As a coach, first time, or even if you're, even if you've done this for a really long time, it's good to know the underpinnings of what makes this effective, right? What allows you to get better so much faster, and that's having this language. So your main takeaway is no matter where you are, is just start by learning the language. That's it. So if you're just starting, just start by learning the language. When we get started, we're often concerned about like, oh, do I need to like master this? Do I need to get this little detail right? And the answer is yes, but also eventually. So if you're just starting to coach, the most important thing is that you learn the language. Now, the one thing that we don't want to do is something that's called word thinking. Now, word thinking is where we get in an argument about what words mean. And a good example of that would be to say, let's take the 10 and 2, for example. Some people call the 10 and 2 the mohawk. A really non-productive argument is to say, well, it's actually called the mohawk. And another person's like, well, it's actually called the heel to heel. Another person's like, well, it's actually called the 10 and 2. It doesn't matter what it's called. It doesn't matter where it's originated, like who said it first, what it means, like none of that really matters. And what can happen is we can spend hours and hours and hours, days even, arguing about what a word is, right? Like it's definitely not a mohawk, it's actually a 10 and 2. No, it's actually a heel to heel. Doesn't matter. What does matter is that we all agree on a common language, right? So if I say mohawk, it's kind of like, imagine if I say, water, and in French, that's O, right? E-A-U. And I'm saying, oh, that's O and that's water. We all know it means that wet H2O stuff, right? So Mohawk and Tenon 2 is the same as like water and O, right? It's like, it doesn't really matter. We just have to agree on what it means. And then once we've created that term and how it's translated across different skill development languages, and we're not arguing about that, we're just agreeing that, like, okay, you call it this and I call it that, cool. Then it's about creating that consistency.